a.m.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Ocala. You're listening to AM Ocala Live, WOCA, The Source. As we're now 9:43 here, about almost 15 minutes before the top of the 10 o'clock hour. Stay tuned. At the 10 o'clock hour, we'll have higher education calling in and talk about returning to the workforce when we get to the point where we can, where we open up the country. And as we've been hearing more of the so-called protests, along countrywide with certain states, citizens kind of up in arms saying, hey, let's open things back up. As that was the topic of our Conservative Watch Hour a little bit as they got the conversation rolling in Washington, as last week's Conservative Watch Hour show, which we say stay tuned on Friday for Conservative Watch Hour, which you just heard, as we have host Annie Marie Delgado, as we have her in the studio to talk a little bit of the expectations of what the government does, which she is the head of Trump Team 2020. And with that, we do get updates as such, and I want to take the time to throw it out there what President is looking to do today, April 22nd. Today, President Donald Trump will be President Donald Trump and First Lady Melania Trump will be taking part in a tree planting ceremony at the White House. The event is in recognition of Earth Day and Arbor Day. And the President and the First Lady will join the nation in the celebration. During last year's event, the President noted that, quote, on this day, we reaffirm our responsibility to protect God's wondrous creation for the future generations. Now, due to the ongoing outbreak of COVID-19, all involved in this event will be expected to take careful precautions to maintain social distancing procedures, hand sanitations, and other safety measures. In the afternoon, the President will have a working lunch with the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, as they are expected to discuss the ongoing fall of the global oil prices, as well as increased pressure on China for more accurate data and transparency on the origin of the coronavirus. The State Department released a statement regarding a meeting between Secretary Pompeo and Chinese diplomats, and it read, quote, that the secretaries stressed the need for full transparency and information sharing to the combat of COVID-19 pandemic and prevent future outbreaks. And following his meetings today, the president will take part in the White House Coronavirus Task Force briefing, of course, to update the nation on any new data, federal efforts, and progress made at combating the COVID-19 outbreak. And it says here, for God bless the President and the First Lady today as they take part in the tree planting ceremony for guidance for the President, Secretary Pompeo, as they discuss issues of the foreign policy and encourage the encouragement of clarity of mind, wisdom for the President and all task force members as they continue to work to solve the issues caused by the outbreak. So a little update there as we give our shout out and thanks to Annie Marie Delgado, President Trump Team 2020, as she gives us those updates. And stay tuned for hosting her show there, the Conservative Watch Hour, which airs right after our AM Ocala Live on Fridays from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. So stay tuned for that. As we're rolling through here to get to the top of the 10 o'clock hour, the meat and potatoes of our show, it's time for On This Day in History, as we roll with events that have taken place on this day, April 22nd, in history. As we go back to 1889 on this day, April 22nd, 1889, the Oklahoma land rush begins. The Oklahoma land rush begins with an estimated 50,000 people lined up at noon, hoping to stake a claim for a homestead. The claim could be up to 160 acres in size. It included most of the following Oklahoma counties: Canadian, Cleveland, Kingser, Logan, Oklahoma, and Payne, and a total of 2 million acres. This land had previously been occupied by Native Americans, but the Indians Appropriations Bill approved the transfer of 2 million acres for the settlement. It was back in 1889 that an estimated 50,000 people were lined up in hopes to get a piece of the land there, the Ocala land rush. as it included those counties, as mentioned. Moving forward up to 1915, it was in 1915, on April 22nd, that Belgium poison gas. This poison gas is used by the Germans for the first time in World War I, with devastating effects. As in 1915, it was used, like we said, from the Germans in World War II, which is just crazy. But it was on this date that had taken place. Like we mentioned, like it's always that reminder that not everything in past is sunshine and rainbows. That's for sure. As mentioned, as I'm looking up just a little bit more here in lieu of what had come up, it says they introduced the poison gas on this day in 1915 as German forces shocked Allied soldiers along the Western Front by firing more than 150 tons of lethal chlorine gas against two French colonial divisions at Ypres in Belgium. And this was the first major gas attack by the Germans that devastated the Allied line, which is creepy and crazy nonetheless. And with that, we've got a caller on the air. Good morning, WOCA.
Oh, good morning. This is Jennifer Friend.
Hi, Jennifer. How you doing?
Hi. Sorry, I'm with College of Central Florida. Calling in a little bit early.
Gotcha. Tell you what, it's going to be on the main line there, 732-8000.
I'm so sorry.
No worries. We'll be talking at you a little bit.
Okay, bye.
And with that, we just one reminder, stay tuned. We'll have Central Florida, as she just called in there. We'll be talking with her after the 10 o'clock hour. As we just mentioned there, on this day in history, it was 1915, April 22nd. Moving forward, still on the premise of war, it was in 1943 on this date, April 22nd, 1943, that the United States Japanese prisoners of war, the U.S. War Department stated publicly that Japanese prisoners of war would be treated decently. And it was the stated publicly that the Japanese prisoners of war would be treated decently, considering how it went with what we had on our own country with Japanese prisoners. In 1952, moving along, as on this date, April 22nd, 1952, live atomic bomb test. For the first time in history, viewers witnessed the detonation of an atomic bomb at the U.S. testing site in the Yucca Flat in Nevada, this time on television, as everybody tuned in to see it in their own homes. The atomic bomb test was larger than those dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in World War II. So it was on this day in 1952 that you could watch in your own living room on television, for the first time in history, the live detonation of an atomic bomb, as it took place at the U.S. testing site in the Yucca Flat in Nevada. So it was on television, and that's the caveat to it, is how the atomic bomb that they tested were larger than those dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Crazy. On this date, April 22nd, 1961, President Fidel Castro of Cuba will make his first public announcements since the insurgent forces' invasion on the Bay of Pigs, which was continued last week on the TV and radio nationwide. Also, Russian leader Khrushchev has denounced the invasion and has stated publicly that he holds the United States directly responsible for this gangstrom against Cuba, as it was the first public announcements made from Fidel Castro on this date in 1961 in lieu of the Bay of Pigs. Moving on, 1971, as it was mentioned here, April 22nd, 1971, Haiti, Papadoc. It says Haiti's dictator, François Papadoc de Valer, died after 14 years in power. It was in 1971 that the dictator of Haiti had passed away on this date in history. In 1972, the anti-war demonstrations of such on this day, April 22nd. Anti-war demonstrations drew 100,000 demonstrators in the cities across America, including New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, and Chicago. Crazy. Here's on a lighter note, in lieu of sports, it was on this day in 1988, right here in our home state of Florida, a little bit of sports. It was on this date, April 22nd, 1988, as the NBA announced two new Florida basketball teams, the Miami Heat and the Orlando Magic, as they got their start in 1988 on this day, as mentioned, to begin playing the NBA, which we know the Miami Heat have won themselves a couple NBA championships. Now it's time for Orlando to do the same. I've always kind of liked, even though growing up in Cleveland and being a Cavaliers fan, I've always kind of liked the Orlando Magic. We don't know basketball right now. I'm going to say let's see what they can maybe end up doing next season. But in moving on with on this day in history, 1993, April 22nd, 1993, the Holocaust Memorial Museum opened up today in Washington, D.C. back in 1993. The museum is dedicated to documenting, studying, and interpreting the history of the Holocaust and serves as the U.S. official memorial to the millions of Jews and others killed during the Holocaust under directives of Nazi Germany. As that's crazy there. Now, it says here that moving on to 2005, it was 2005 on this date that terrorists plead guilty. Zacharias Moussaoui pleads guilty to conspiring with other al-Qaeda members as a part of the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks. He was later sentenced to life in prison and is serving a life sentence at the federal ADX Supermax prison in Florence, Colorado. So it was one of the people that was a French citizen of Moroccan descent, was Zacharias Moussaoui, as he pled guilty. It was on this day in 2005 that we got some closure of somebody who had participated with other al-Qaeda members as a part of the September 11 attacks, as he's actually still serving the life sentence at the federal ADX Supermax prison in Florence, Colorado. Moving on a little bit here, it says in 2010, on April 22nd, the Vatican has defended its decision not to defrank the Wisconsin priest that was accused of sexually assaulting as many as 200 deaf boys from 1950s to the 1970s. Wisconsin advocates for victims of clergy sex abuse have suggested that the Vatican's handling of the case involving Father Lawrence Murphy provided evidence of an institutional cover-up that spanned decades. It was on this date that the Vatican itself defended the decision not to defrank that Wisconsin priest. That's incredible. Moving on to 2014, as the April 22nd, 2014, the U.S. Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court, ruled in favor 6-2 over a Michigan ban on affirmative action. The voter-approved ban did not allow public universities to use race as a factor when making decisions for admissions, and opponents of the ban stated that it allowed majority white voters to take institutionalized opportunities away from minority students, only furthering the disparities that affirmative action sought to equalize. That was in 2014. So that rounds up on this day in history. One I wanted to mention from yesterday, as we didn't get to on this day in history yesterday, although there were just a few of them as such, was it was going back all the way to 1918 on that date yesterday, was as an aviator, as back then in the World War I era, was more of like knights with chivalry when it came to it, but the Red Baron, German fighter ace, was killed. It was yesterday back in 1918. Baron Manfred von Richthofen, I always get that wrong, butcher it. The German ace known as the Red Baron, credited with 80 confirmed air combat victories, had been killed in action. It was yesterday, April 21st, 1918. So a little shout out there to the aviation geek in me. And then the other one to mention was on a lighter note, and that's where we'll leave it. It was in 1956, yesterday, 1956, that Elvis Presley had his first #1 hit in the Billboard charts with Heartbreak Hotel. As it was yesterday, 1956, the king, rock and roll, Elvis Presley, had his first #1 hit in 1956 with Heartbreak Hotel. As we're moving our way, like we said, to the 10 o'clock hour, we're going to have higher education. We'll be talking with them about returning to the workforce. But before we do, just a couple cool birthdays to mention in lieu of our history was today is the birthday, April 22nd, of Peter Frampton, Peter Kenneth Frampton, from Beckenham, Kent, England, English musician, singer, producer, and multi-instrument, and talented as Peter Frampton, The Wind of Change, Frampton Comes Alive, as was released in 1976 in the top 10 around the world, including #1 release while he was still playing his last album, Fingerprints. His birthday to Peter Frampton, and to actor John Joseph Nicholson, or better known as Jack Nicholson, as his birthday is today. He was born in 1937. American actor, director, producer, and screenwriter, best known for his many great acting parts in so many movies, and is nominated for an Academy Award 12 times. He was won Best Actor twice for One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and As Good as It Gets. He also won Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor in Terms of Endearment. And a list of all his films, you could see a ton of them. The big one, Easy Rider, and one that I just saw the other day, A Few Good Men. I Want the Truth. You Can't Handle the Truth. As we come to the top of the 10 o'clock hour here, we're going to leave you with that. We'll be back right after this. WOCA Ocala, 96.3 FM, 1370 AM. Back after this.
I'm Chris Foster. There are more than 45,000 coronavirus deaths reported in the United States now. That's doubled in just over a week. President Trump says about protests against stay-at-home orders,